Welcome back to Recreational Garage. In this video we're trying to wrap up a few things under the dash here. We have this plate that I cut at the end of the last video, and what this does is it goes up under here, as you can see, and this will make it to where we can bolt the dash to the brake and clutch pedal assembly, just to add a little extra support there. So we have to just mark that up, drill some holes, and bolt it together. Once that's done, we will put the steering column back in and then work on the lower mount here that will also cover that hole up there. So we'll try to get those two done, and then a couple other things we can do from there if we have time. Anyway, let's get to it and see what we can get done. All right, we made some great progress this week. We got the steering column lower mount all fully welded on, holes drilled so it bolts to the firewall. So our steering column mounts are all finished. I did have to take the pedals out and everything to be able to drill these 2 holes out for the mounting of the steering column. And I welded some nuts on the other side of the firewall to be able to install that easier. Next step we're going to work on next week is the seat mounts. These need to be lowered just like 3/4 of an inch to an inch because they just sit a little bit too tall. So we'll do that, and then I think we're almost done fabricating stuff inside the car here, so we can start moving back to putting suspension back together. Anyway, great progress this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.